It's a good question, and I can go over some of my backstory, and I think
Please.
it's buried there, and I'm
Okay.
slowly even figuring out for myself where that drive comes from and kind of
Mm.
what motivates me.
Yeah.
And we started Relativity when I was 22, and I believe Tim was
Mm.
25.
Wow.
And Tim's my co-founder, and he's still CEO there, today.
Mm.
But before that, Tim and I knew each other from USC's Rocket Propulsion Lab. We went to school at USC together.
Cool.
And I think that's where a lot of that drive at least started to manifest,
Mm.
where I was running USC's Rocket Propulsion Lab. Um, I I started in the lab actually my first week of school. They came to
Wow.
my kind of introduction to aerospace class, and they brought a big rocket that they had built, kind of this carbon fiber rocket that was beautiful. And, it's a really nice rocket, the one that they flew
Mm.
first as a lab when they were founded. But they were telling us about this, vision they had in this goal to be the first student group to fly a rocket to space.
Mm.
And, space is defined at the von Karman line, so, kind of 100 kilometers up.
Mm.
And so quite high. And when you normally hear about students flying rockets, it's, competitions to hit, who can get closest to a mile or who can launch
Right.
an egg and land it. But this was, flying a rocket to space and
Yeah.
something, quite extravagant. And it was this self-set goal where it wasn't a competition, it wasn't, industry sponsored, it wasn't even, kind of university sponsored. It was just students really wanting to push the limits of what they could do.
That's so cool.
And I fell in love with it. I went to their first meeting and, essentially never left. Where for the next 4 years, I spent 2 years as one of the lab leads and then 2 years at the head of the lab. I was
Wow.
composites lead, so making the carbon fiber structures for a number of years,
Mm.
and then took over the entire lab as a junior. And running that group, I got a ton of hands-on experience, whether on the management side, the structural side, the engineering side, regulatory, government affairs, insurance. That's kind of
Wow.
all-encompassing when it
Yeah.
comes to a rocket launch. It's much more than making a rocket. I was the
Right.
first student and youngest person ever to get FAA clearance to fly a rocket to space
It's
there.
amazing.
And that actually was the biggest burden that my generation had to solve. Was we were making the rockets, the test fires on the ground were going well. There was a decade of research and engineering ahead of me that was built on, but the FAA wouldn't give us a license. I'm like, who are these kids saying they want to fly a rocket to space? It's a
No.
bunch of 19-year-olds. No, and they wouldn't even look at it.
Right.
And there was a big push to get the FAA, the Bureau of Land Management, to agree on jurisdiction,
Mm.
agree with working with us, trust our simulations to the point that they were comfortable with the dispersion analysis. Where is this thing going to land?
Right.
And I think it's really that experience where it was that self-set goal and not having anyone kind of telling you what you should be doing, but also where your limits are and how
Mm.
to do it. We had a goal, we wanted to do it, and then going to industry after that, despite going to some very amazing, exciting companies. All of a sudden, these are fairly large companies with their own culture, their own
Mm.
baggage, and their own kind of challenges where we would face issues. And then all of a sudden it was, you blame the people in the other building, you blame the other department. It wasn't something in your control where you can go fix it, because all of a sudden this is a multi-thousand person company
Right.
where it's someone else's fault and you're stuck dealing with it.
Yeah.
I think there was a big drive at that point, both for myself and Tim, going into the Relativity founding, where we had experienced setting our own goals, building our own organizations, kind of controlling our own destiny, and we lost that dramatically quickly going into industry after graduation.
That's such a unique like I've experienced that in a much smaller level, but it's still the same. Like this podcast has been that way for me. There's been no limit set by anybody else. Our 3D printing lab, same thing. It's just whatever we can make. You come with us an idea, sure, we'll figure it out. Um, I don't know if that's like a scientific way of going. Like if that's like the scientist who just like this new era of like our generation, which is, we're in an industry that's been around for over 50 years, that's so used to doing it the same way. And we've got so many tools available to us that it's hard for us not to want to do whatever we want, right? Or at least set our goals to whatever we want to. So that's so cool that you guys had that in academia and then brought that to the business. So let's talk about relativity a little bit. What did you guys start with? What was as someone that went from the scientific road to the business
Mhm.
road, I think this is the what I hope this segment does for people is people that are either applying to college or in college, and they start feeling that that
Yeah.
like I'm out of school, I'm going to the business world. What is this?
Mm,
Like, how is that for you guys at building a business? I mean, that's a whole nother
right.
thing.
It was a learning experience,
Mm,
definitely, because neither myself nor Tim, neither of us took a business class, a
mm,
finance class, a legal class, engineering entrepreneurship class.
right.
I never think in college had the expectation I would start a business or be in the business world. I had thoughts
Mm,
on, do I get a master's degree?
yeah.
Do I do a PhD? And I remember even, I did my grad school applications my senior year, and then I took the GRE to submit alongside them. And I did so poorly on the GRE that I was like, I can't apply. I can't submit this. I was embarrassed. I didn't know I could do, that poorly in writing.
I've
And
reached I've reached new limits in that area too,
I
so
know.
I'm with you.
It was surprising, but something
Mm,
where, I was excited to go into industry. I didn't have really a set vision for what I would do if I went into grad school.
mm,
But I didn't really know what I wanted my career to look like. It was a little haphazard. So I never really thought down the entrepreneur route or the
mm,
business route. And it was something where, it's kind of funny, the origin stories of how this stuff comes together, where, for myself and Tim, Tim was at Blue Origin. He was full-time at Blue Origin. He graduated about a year and a half before me.
okay.
And so he had been there for a bit. I was at SpaceX, and I started as an intern. I started as an intern doing propulsion on Cargo Dragon. So it was the first Dragon missions to fly on the 1.1 Falcon 9 version 1.1, which is like
Wow.
flight 6 and 7. I think 7 was the first Dragon on 1.1, and 6 was the Cassiope mission. And it's weird to think that flight 6 and 7 were only like, 6 years ago,
It's
7 years
crazy.
ago. It was 2014,
Yeah.
and it was like a year between flights for Falcon 9. It was
Wow.
a very different era. But I did propulsion system qualification for Cargo Dragon to show that the vehicle could fly on 1.1 with updated vibration loads and
Hmm.
structural loads and the like. And as I converted from an intern to full time after, I think it was CRS 4, it
Mm,
was Dragon 6 CRS 4 was the first mission I worked on. I converted to full time. And I had the opportunity to move in with some of the other interns who were also converting full time down in kind of Redondo Beach, South Bay here
cool.
in LA. And I got cold feet. It was something where
Mm,
there was something in me, and I don't know if there was that same drive I was talking about of, kind of controlling your own destiny.
yeah.
But I got cold the moment that I saw a lease with a 1 year commitment. There was something in the back of my mind that said, I'm not ready to sign that, or I don't want,
Mm,
a lease or where I'm living be what stops me from doing. I didn't know what at the time, but doing something else. I think the big company vibe, and SpaceX was, 3,000 people, I think, at the time.
right.
They're up to, about 10,000 now. But 3,000 at the time, where you
Yeah.
start to feel even some of the big company
Definitely.
politics and woes at that size. So for me, I ended up moving back in with my parents in Pasadena, and I started doing the hour-long commute each way to Hawthorne. And that's something where, to pass time during the commute, I started calling my friends, and one of them was Tim. And that's where we would talk on, what we saw in industry and kind of trends and the vibes we were seeing. And one of them was 3D printing, which metal 3D printing was pretty novel
It's
at the
true.
time.
Hmm.
Super Draco on Crew Dragon was I'd say the initial success of 3D printed engines,
Mm.
and that was very novel at the time. And now it's mainstream. If you don't 3D print your engines, you're pretty silly. But it was really novel at the time, and then not demonstrated. And I transitioned from working on Cargo Dragon to then the pad abort vehicle. Saw the pad abort vehicle, success flight, and then transitioned to designing hardware for Crew Dragon,
Mm.
and very much saw the success of 3D printing with Super Draco, and started asking the question. And Tim, had a parallel journey at Blue of seeing initial success with 3D printing, and then asking the question of, can we print more? And it
Yeah.
was often viewed, and still is in certain ways today, it was viewed as, an art form where it's, something that fully takes advantage of the benefits of 3D printing. Oh,
Mm.
that's not a functional rocketed part. That belongs
Right.
in a museum, or that shouldn't be in a turbo pump. You can't use, fatiguing components like a 3D printed one in a turbo pump. And people have these very strong critiques on 3D printing where we wanted to see them advance. And it was like,
Mm,
have people tried these? And people would say no. And it's like, well, why are you so negative on it? And it's really deep rooted. It's something that's still, I think, intriguing and wraps into some of the embedded investment thesis today, that manufacturing is such a deep rooted kind of value in so many people, of like the how you make things
mm,
part of someone's career. Whether it's a blacksmith in a shop or a manufacturing process in a factory,
mm,
you have entire cities built on top of certain manufacturing processes. It's very deep rooted. So being able to transform the manufacturing within any organization is very, very high inertia. And Tim and
mm,
I both felt that, and we talked about it on those drives where people just didn't want to adopt 3D printing. And then that started the rapid journey for us as far as, okay, if these companies won't do it, will another company do it?
mm.
And then us, kind of having the shower thought of, well, what if we created a company to do this?
Right.
And then very rapidly, we were like, maybe a company could do it. We pursued some financing. We kind of learned about the business world and startup
Mm,
world, stepped out of our other jobs at SpaceX and Blue, formed Relativity, and the rest is history at that point. I know I kind
wow.
of skimmed over there, learning in the business legal world, but I'll pause as far as that was kind of the foundation.
Fair.
It was very, if I didn't get cold feet on signing that lease,
Right.
we wouldn't have had those drives, and I wouldn't have been kind of postulating these ideas around, because I would have had a 5-minute commute instead of an hour.
Right.
And it was that cold feet and where my parents happened to live compared to Hawthorne, which is driving through downtown LA here,
Mm.
that I don't know if Relativity would have ever existed.
That's such an wow. I got chills thinking about that because similar path, took many drives at a job, trying to figure out the next step. So I hope your back is okay. That's my first thing because my back is
It is.
terrible. Uh, but wow. So I think a lot of people get stuck in the path that's already been laid out. Like for you guys, right? Relativity space. Everyone's just going to say, "Oh, they already did it." Blah blah blah. But it's like it was not a known path for you, and I think that's an important thing to point out. Like you had that gut feeling, you went after it, and it ended up working out. Um, so relativity space, it's going to be hard to put this in a nutshell, but in a nutshell, you guys went from we could 3D print some things of a rocket to essentially 3D printing the entire thing, right? In a nutshell.
Yeah, we were seeing the success, and if you look back in history of kind of metal 3D printing, the success of printing rocket engines was really shown through, there's some NASA work in the early 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX really pioneered with Super Draco, especially for human spaceflight. That was really unheard of at the time, and is still the only 3D printed human spaceflight engine. So it was really, really unheard of, but we were seeing that success. And it was something where there's all these benefits you see in 3D printing,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't have tooling. You can translate manufacturing, kind of digitally. It's digitally designed manufacturing, where you push your complex design to the factory and then it's made. You don't have to translate that design into work instructions and
Right.
quality assurance. It's kind of this data-driven process where you have digital instructions coming in
Yeah.
to the machines, and you have a lot of things you can verify digitally coming out, because it's a very machine controlled process. It's kind of data driven by nature on
Mm-hmm.
inputs and outputs. So it was something that matches the trends you see in the rest of the world on data driven, on software defined. Then you can get complexity you can't get otherwise. You get away from the inertial elements that slow down a lot of aerospace, which is all of the checks that happen in a factory, all the quality assurance, all the verification of manual installation steps. You
Mm-hmm.
move towards that naturally, while getting improved performance, features you can't get otherwise. And then, the strongest, I'd say alignment there is on mass and optimization of structures, where in
Mm-hmm.
traditional manufacturing, whenever you do a machine operation, you're kind of like, the more optimized a part is, the more manufacturing steps there are, you increase cost and you
Mm-hmm.
increase lead time,
Right.
because you have more machines, more steps, bigger factory, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. But with 3D printing, you get this natural incentive alignment, where the more optimized your structure is, it's less time in the machine and
Mm-hmm.
less raw material used. So it's actually cheaper and faster to make this more optimized product. And I think people really don't get that.
No.
where you see this incentive alignment, and people look at some of even like Relativity's early prints or what's coming out on the first vehicle, and they're like, oh, you can make that by bent sheet metal.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, on the first one, sure, parts of it can be replicated by sheet metal. Parts of it really can't be, as you look on the insides.
Yeah.
But what happens where now on flight 2, you can add more features, and flight 3, you can add more features. And every time you add more
Iterative.
features and you optimize the structure more, you're actually making this more complex product faster and
Yeah.
cheaper than the first time. And you build this flywheel where with traditional manufacturing, you actually slow down the flywheel. You have more manual labor steps, you have more people involved, you have a bigger production effort in general. There's only so many good technicians in the world, especially for aerospace. It's scaling production. If you look at SpaceX or anyone, scaling production is harder than the first vehicle. So what happens if you have infrastructure like 3D printing that allows you to scale production in a software defined manner rather than through labor? And it's dramatically different, and it's still interesting to see some of the commentary on relativity where we've built printers, and to actually trace back to some of what your question was, we saw that success at a small scale. We knew it had to scale up to bigger printers.
Right.
We designed those printers, we did the napkin math as far as can a printer print fast enough at a physics level
Right.
to be economical in this, and we demonstrated that on a napkin side, and then had to spend a couple years developing that, and the printers are getting faster and faster every day there. But something where it's this kind of underlying infrastructure that has parallels to what you see as far as the flywheels in software, where it's just faster and faster every day, more complexity, more layers deep on infrastructure and APIs and what can be done in a fairly abstracted manner.
Mm.
And a lot of the world will still look at relatively 3D printing and say, oh, I can make that, on a mill. I can make that in a sheet metal bending machine. And they're the ones that'll be more and more blown away every time Relativity has a more complex product coming out of the door, essentially for free, because it's software manufacturing. There's no factory change for that
Right.
extra complexity.
I'm blown away. I mean, working in 3D printing on a daily basis at a day job and then doing it when I come home, I'm also blown away by the lack of, like, I don't know if it's imagination of like what it actually capable of, but like bring an idea from, like you said, the back of a napkin to reality. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to define, but once you see it, like you've seen it, like I've seen it, like it's hard not to keep that Pandora's box of what we can do open. So it's interesting now that you've phrased it that way. It makes complete sense why like embedded ventures was your next step, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're looking for these things that seem like they could be innovative ideas, new ideas, and you're actually open to seeing, well, can we do this?
Right.
And 3D printing, I mean, to touch like on one more thing before we, because I do want to talk more about embedded ventures and this new thing you have going on. Um, with 3D printing, I think, I worked in a traditional manufacturing environment, injection molding. So I was around tool makers. I was helping them kind of bring their, because there's no more apprenticeship program. So going more to that problem that they're having in the aerospace field, these skilled technicians took a very long time to do that, and there's not schools that are really teaching this, and if there are, there's not a lot of them. So it's like all these people are in their 60s, you know, they're older. They're not going to be around that long. So if we don't find a way to get additive in and get these younger people into manufacturing and being hands-on, like there's no hope for the future of the industry as it was. So I think it's a tool that can be used, additive and traditional. They'll be together. I get in plenty of Twitter arguments with people who are very anti 3D printing, but I try not to do that as often as I can. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting to see the backlash there and some of the negativity.
mm,
And part of it too, I completely agree with what you're saying, that there's not enough of kind of those hands-on programs in education. Like my middle school stopped teaching the woodshop class that I took. Even some of the college programs,
yeah.
it's interesting to see because people view, especially within university administration, they'll often see the hands-on programs as liabilities.
Mm,
And that's something that I find really disappointing from a couple of perspectives, because like, yes, the programs can be dangerous. You're working with heavy machinery, you're working with chemicals
hmm
there, but the way that the universities approach them, especially in recent times, it seems like it's been a transition over the last kind of 5-10 years,
mm,
and has been, these projects could be dangerous, therefore take them away from the students And
Right.
I view it as something that I think was even beneficial. I was reflecting on this, within, it was a couple months ago, even within like the business world, right? Where you show people a piece of heavy machinery
Mm.
and you tell them it's dangerous, never touch it, look away. And what I was trained was this is a piece of dangerous machinery, heavy
Mm.
machinery. This is how it can be dangerous. This is how you figure out in ways it can be dangerous and think about it. Here's the precautions you take. Here's the procedures you take. Here's the equipment you wear. And here's how to approach a very, potentially dangerous piece of machinery in a
Mm.
way where you account for the risks and you come out safely and you have a successful outcome.
Right.
And the way that the universities and I perhaps should generalize that more, that education has tackled those hands-on projects is, oh, they could be dangerous, teach people to look at dangerous situations and walk away, turn their
Mm.
back to them. And I think there's something really valuable even for me in my the business world that I learned from running a mill, running a
Yeah.
lathe, running a filament winder, right, running a robot, where you account for the risks and you come out successfully
Mm.
rather than taking the non-strategic approach of just run away.
Mm.
And that's why I think we've been able to take certain business risks as far as standing up a company, launching a fund, doing an
Right.
investment that could be very risky, very dangerous. But you look at it strategically, you tackle the challenges, you account for them, and if you check every box correctly, everyone has a successful outcome despite it being a risky situation. And that's where you see that
Right.
transformation, is where you kind of approach the risk and you tackle it rather than looking at risks as something to run away from.
Mm.
And I think there's some parallels there that are unfortunate within the greater education community, where these hands-on projects are not being accounted for in a way that's what's best for the student, but
Right.
instead for what's best for the bottom line on a liability side. And
Mm.
I do get rather disappointed in seeing that trend.
Yeah. Same here. And I mean, I'm not sure what I can do on a personal level, but sharing your story and your opinion on those kind of things is, I think, where I could start.